Oh, hello, everyone. Well, I would say hello, but I can't see any of you from up here. They blind us. But hello, it's good to see everybody and to talk to everybody outside. Here We Still Stand is always a special time of year. This late October is something I always look forward to. You get to talk to friends new and old. It's sort of a glimpse, I think, of the heavenly feast to come. There's so much good food, good talk, good drink, and also, sort of reminiscent of the life of the Inklings, people like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien who got to share ideas and fellowship together. And so it's always great to be here. I do feel like it sneaks up on me, though. Here We Still Stand is consistently at the end of October, and the beginning of my October is seemingly always really busy. The first Here We Still Stand, 2017, happened, I want to say, just 10 days after my second child was born, Emerson. And so that was a bit of a rush. You're not exactly thinking straight when you come to the conference then. And back then we did our first live podcast and things like that. And you can ask Rod if you see him around. I was woefully unprepared and left the guys unprepared as well. And then this year, very similar situation. My fourth child now was born just 3 weeks ago from this morning. Una, little girl, you've probably seen her around strapped to her mom. Thank you. She's strapped to her mom or being handed around family and friends and stuff like that. So if you get a glimpse of the little baby, you'll probably find that is very cute. And so you can see that this always does kind of sneak up on me, and it's a bit of my own making. But I was plenty comfortable with it this time because I got to pick my own topic. And if you have a little insider knowledge about how Here We Still Stand works, that's pretty unusual. See, the magic of Here We Still Stand sort of rests on two very hardworking people, I think, for the most part. There's others involved too who should be really thanked, but Lana Trombley, who coordinates the logistics of the conference, puts a lot of work in, and if you see her, you should give her a big thank you. And then the magic of the conference really, I think, rests on the shoulders of Dan Price. And you guys are familiar with Dan. He does 10 minutes of stand-up before he gives us 10 minutes of proclamation, and it's pretty amazing. And so you can tell he has a feel and a flair for showmanship and how to make a conference feel and present right. And part of that magic is that he tells people what they're doing. He gives people the topics that he knows they'll be able to land. But when C.S. Lewis came around, I, having insider knowledge at 1517, knowing that we were going to have a C.S. Lewis conference before it was announced, I rushed to him and I said, I call dibs. I call dibs on the Great Divorce. And there's a reason for that. I think, I keep getting asked, what's my favorite work of Lewis? And I think it is Great Divorce, though I love various books in the Chronicles of Narnia, particularly The Horse and His Boy resonates with me. But the Great Divorce, as I told a little story on the panel yesterday for Thinking Fellows, saved my bacon a little bit in developing a thesis for my master's degree around catechesis. And I attempted to write a paper. You can ask some of the people who've been lucky enough to read it to see if I succeeded at all. But I attempted to write a paper about how literature could be used in catechesis or alongside catechesis or as a form of catechesis. And this idea had been planted in my mind by Rod Rosenblatt over the years through passing comments about using Narnia alongside catechesis. And as you begin to read, especially Lewis, and Lewis was the target of this paper because he makes it so easy, Lewis paints beautiful theological pictures in his fictional works. And so that's what we're going to be dealing with a little bit today. We're going to work with the Great Divorce. I think Dan and I hashed out the title to be The Great Divorce and the Illusion of Choice. And so we're going to see what kind of theological truths Lewis not only sprinkled, but just painted throughout the Great Divorce today. The Great Divorce is a short book by Lewis. I think the copy I have is 130 pages, and it's a very generous 130 pages. This is 16-point font with 2 inches margins on all 4 sides and really thick spacing. You could make this book 40 pages if you wanted. In fact, we probably have enough time to skip the breakout altogether and just speed read it right here. You could certainly do that. You could certainly get through it. It's a short story by Lewis, but I think it's one of his most theological, outside of particular theological essays that he wrote. He wanted, I think in many ways, to write a theological tract on the problem of evil, different than some of his other books, The Problem of Pain, for instance, but he wanted to do it without getting accused of theological innovation in a lot of ways. And so he then puts it into allegory, and he reminds his reader several times, both at the beginning and at the end of the book and in the preface, that this is really his imaginations, that please don't pin him down as unorthodox for anything he says incorrect about heaven or hell therein, that this is perhaps a bit of speculation. And as a Lutheran, I'm a little terrified of speculating about theology. We would prefer to ditch speculation and preach certainty. And I think for all his speculating, Lewis does stumble into a certain level of certainty here, even if he wants the safety of, I'm no theologian, I'm a literary critic. And so The Great Divorce is a great example of being able to dive into Lewis as Christians and have a work that I think is preaching particularly at us, and while not an apologetic in itself, helps us in conversations with non-Christians in a sense of becoming sympathetic to them, understanding what kinds of sins they may actually be confessing, and also seeing that in order to get from hell to heaven, nobody can be alone. So let's go over the gist of The Great Divorce. I've never heard of a great divorce, let alone a good divorce or even a fine divorce. Divorce is a messy affair. For many, it's a painful issue. It's sad, it's heartbreaking, it's usually the end of something good. So how could we possibly have a great divorce? The divorce here is more like a division or a distinction, I think, for Lewis. And so it's the distinction or the division between heaven and hell here. Lewis is saying there is a divorce, a line between heaven and hell. But I don't think we can stop there at the distinction. He tells us that we need some synonyms around heaven and hell, and he does this in his introduction before the book. And he tells us that this is really about the difference between good and evil. And Lewis wants to go on an assault against a particular mindset around evil that many Christians and non-Christians alike share. It's one of the common ways that we deal with the problem of pain, the problem of suffering, and the problem of evil. And that is to make evil a lesser good, to make evil something that shapes or gives opportunity to be good. We can see this in our culture, in movies and TV all the time. The reason that the world is bad is so that you can choose to be good, so that the hero can rise up. This is sort of the framework of most hero stories or journeys in our culture today, is that a bad world is given to us as an opportunity to be good. Lewis outright rejects this. He says in the preface, and I'll quote here, "Evil can be undone, but it cannot develop into good." It cannot develop into good. There's nothing about evil that can or will make us good. And when Lewis is talking about evil here, he's not talking about the really easy or universal examples of evil that we could all agree on. He's not talking about cruel political tyrants. He's not talking about just murderers and thieves and robbers, those that we could all identify in this room, those who belong in prison, maybe even deserve death. Evil is something really quite simple in The Great Divorce. it turns out to be the desires and choices of all men in this story. So what is the Great Divorce? If it is an allegory about heaven and hell, or a lesson on how evil must be removed, must be divorced from good, it starts with a picture of hell. This is a pilgrim's journey. So we start with one main character, and typical of pilgrim's journeys, this main character is going to become an outside onlooker in to other people's lives and conversations. You've probably seen this in other places. Dante's Inferno is actually a really great example of this as well. Another trilogy, really, of books about the division or the difference between heaven and hell. Now, Lewis takes an extremely different approach from Dante. Dante gives us a very harsh hell with layers that get harsher and harsher and harsher. And for many of us, we probably don't realize the extent to which Dante has developed our vision of hell for all Christians in the West, and just how much our picture of fire, brimstone, ice, judgment, a devil poking us and prodding us comes from Dante himself. And so Lewis is going to paint us a different picture. It's going to paint us a picture with less evil people than we see being tortured in Dante's realm. It's going to come from the occupants of hell being in a small, gray English town. Small, gray English town. Hell is a small town that is expanding as time goes on, as more occupants enter into it, but there's nothing really quite extraordinary or hellish about it. It's gray, it's overcast, it's raining every day, just like Seattle, England, Norway, you name it. Some of, probably for me, the most beautiful places on earth. I'm getting tempted by Lewis's hell already. It's quiet there. There's fish and chip shops, my favorite lunch. There's even bookstores. And hell is the kind of place where the bookstore sells Aristotle's works. Quite interesting. Is this going to be a moral tale, a pilgrim's progress, where the character learns how to progress from their hellish state to heaven? Don't they need Aristotle? Or is Aristotle and the law that he teaches going to keep them trapped in hell? So we have a quiet English town, and we have an unnamed main character. As it progresses, I think it's pretty transparently Lewis himself and his conversion story, at least part of it, is being displayed here. And our unnamed character, walking around his hollow, gray English town, finds himself, for no reason in particular, standing in line, in the queue for the bus. What bus? He has no idea. Where the bus is going? He doesn't know. He's just in the line for the bus, listening to the other passengers in line bicker and argue and describe why they're getting on the bus. Nobody quite understanding what's going on, but everybody eventually finding a seat. This bus then begins its drive through the gray little town. Our unnamed Lewis here is listening more and more to the bickering characters. There's a bickering husband and wife on the bus. There are fighting friends and such, and they're all complaining about the types of people that live in this town. They just want more and more distance from each other. It's really uncomfortable to live together. We quite get basically everything we want, but every once in a while I have to run into the people I don't want. So maybe that's why I'm getting on the bus, to escape the rest of the people in this gray little town. That bus continues to travel through town until all of a sudden our narrator looks down and sees that he is not in the gray town anymore. The bus has flown. This bus does not have wings, but now it's in the gray clouds. The gray little English city is slowly disappearing. And as it goes up and up, the journey is becoming more and more mysterious. There's something eerie about it. But he can't stop listening to the other passengers still, overhearing all of their woes, all of their complaints about the town. This does lead us to get some descriptions about the town, the narrator realizing that the town is the kind of place where you get everything you want almost. You have the house that you want, where you want it, but it doesn't stop the rain from getting in. You have whatever sort of stores fit your fancy, but you're never quite full when you eat. You're never quite satisfied when you're done reading. And as he's reminiscing on the realities of life in the gray little town, he suddenly finds himself above the clouds, now with a ever-distant sunrise piercing in. The residents of the town, and now the passengers of the bus, have never seen such light in the gray little town. It's jarring, it's uncomfortable. They begin to complain about the direction of the bus. Maybe it could be turned away from the rising sun so that somebody could get some relief, but it just keeps going until it lands on a cliffside, a very solid cliffside, a cliffside covered in green grass next to a flowing river, trees off in the distance, and even further off in the distance, if they can squint their eyes enough to look past the sunrise, a large towering mountain. They've now landed in somewhere Lewis describes as in between heaven and hell, a sort of pre-heaven, kind of purgatory, but as the journey goes, the reality of this place is that it's just real. It's not like the hollow gray town. The grass has color, but it's also firm. They stand on it and it hurts. They can't move anything where they've landed. Lewis himself leans over to pick up a leaf and finds that it's as heavy as a bag of coal, he says. He can't get it to budge off the ground. What is going on? And as the light begins to pierce them more and more, the people on the bus begin to realize that they're not really people. They're hollow, just like the town was. They're ghostly and disfigured. They don't seem to have any substance to them. And maybe it's not that the grass doesn't move or that the leaf is heavy, but finally it hits, I'm not real. I'm something else. I'm a hollow figure of myself. When the bus leaves, nobody knows when it's going to be back, and they seem to be free to roam, and so the various characters that Lewis begins to describe get to freely roam this cliffside, maybe follow the river up, stare at the mountain, and see things like that. And from there, we begin to see that who the residents of hell really are. Lewis now gets to hear very specific conversations from the people, just about how uncomfortable it is. We overhear at first a conversation from one resident who's really concerned about his rights, what is owed him. We then get to hear from another one about fairness, that how some people don't have to live in the gray town who really deserve to, and he lived a good and honest life and should have never been there at all to begin with. This becomes worse as all of these ghostly, disfigured men and women from the bus are sent holy angelic messengers. The book describes them as solid people, real people. Like the land that they've landed into, these people are the extreme opposite of the ghostly figures that we see at the beginning of our story, the figures who come from hell. As they appear closer, the light beaming off of them hurts the eyes of all those who see them and scares many of the ghosts away back towards the bus stop. They want to go back to the place. Lewis sees them marching closer and closer, and some of these solid figures get here before others. And here we are now revealed the messenger in our pilgrim's tale. Each one of our disfigured, ghostly members of hell is given a messenger. In our Lutheran world, we might be said they've been sent a preacher. They've been sent a preacher. And each particular preacher seems to have a relationship to the members of hell. The first one is a particularly challenging one, and Lewis, I think, does this to really shock us into the reality of the universal nature of evil. I think Lewis crafts a perfect lex semper accusat, or the law always accuses here with this, because he sends the murderer of a man's brother to be the messenger of the brother left in hell. We get our first glimpse of a resident of heaven, and it's a murderer. And our first glimpse of a resident of hell is somebody whose brother was murdered by an employee of his, a man who, in our world, would be justified to have killed the murderer in exchange, or set him on trial or done all sorts of things and probably been then given some sort of compensation for his misery, and no compensation has he gotten for his misery. All he's seemed to been given is a trip to hell. What a strange and unusual God must occupy this heaven. It's an extreme offense when we first get it. Lewis tells us that murderers are in heaven and decent businessmen are in hell. That gives us a picture of all of us, I think. And the conversation then goes to what I would certainly bring up, which is fairness. I deserved to be in heaven. I deserved to be here, not you. And what does this particular relationship to the messenger do? It makes it impossible for the man whose brother was murdered to listen to the preacher. The preacher tries over and over again to tell him to just come with me, all will be right. We don't need to argue about that now. Of course I was wrong when I killed your brother. I do not deserve this. You don't deserve to be in heaven. Of course I don't. It's the blood of the one who sent me. It is a not so subtle reminder that our disposition, our will, our desire is to be dealt with fairly. We want to be dealt with fairly. We want to get what we deserve. We want to get what we have earned. And this stark contrast puts it with somebody who really deserves nothing but the death that he got, but he certainly doesn't deserve the salvation that was then awarded to him. This offense then moves to the next. Lewis then paints a picture of two theologians, one in heaven, one in hell, both Christian theologians, strangely enough. The one is described, the messenger to the ghost is described as narrow-minded. He became narrow-minded in his old age. He once was an inquisitive theologian, a free thinker, and then he became harsh and narrow-minded, and we might even say a bigot, saying that some people won't get into heaven, that there is a real hell. How dare he? The theologian who occupied hell is saying that he still believes some things about the Christian faith. He still loves walking down the road and singing his hymns, but really we have to respect each and everyone's ideas and opinions. I am owed my opinions. You became narrow-minded, and I just wanted to be free to think. I wanted to be free to think. The scholar who is in heaven reminds him that there was freedom to think, but that his freedom to think is now getting in the way of one true freedom, the freedom that rests beyond the mountain, the freedom of heaven. They continue to argue, the messenger remaining calm and saying, it is not the closed-mindedness, that is not why I made it here, it is the trust in the one who sent me. This continues to be the theme. There is an allusion to the one who sent me. This is a great picture for us. I think a great picture of the preacher, the great picture of what Christians are sent back in the world to do. We are sent into a world of choices by the one who sent them to go take away people's choices. These messengers come against choice and human desire over and over again. We go further into the story and we see a mother bickering with a sister and a daughter. We see husband and wife fighting. Somebody has made it into heaven and one is a resident of hell. And the distinction continues to be disturbing to us because we can't really pick out which one was better than the other. They're all deserving of hell, yet some are in heaven. What gives? And over again, Lewis is quite explicit about this. There is no deserving. There is no earning. There is just what is given. There is just being forgiven. But this message, and often what happens with the gospel, has a double effect. It has freed the one and revealed the bound nature of the other. As they are confronted with the realities of heaven, the reality of their sin, the reality of their desire, continues to drive them back. Lewis is painting a picture of each and every single one of us. our will and desire bound to sin. Lewis is a great mirror here. He shows us that evil is not just the big bad. Evil is each and every one of us. If you can finish and read The Great Divorce, which I encourage you to do, and not find yourself amongst the residents of hell, I would love to shake your hand. It is impossible to not see yourself wanting fairness, wanting your choices respected, wanting your rights, wanting paid your own, being upset that somebody in your family who is worse off than you made it and you didn't, being upset that somebody died and went to heaven before you, that you had to stay here and suffer while they got off easy. You see the jealousy of the human heart and the human nature. You see what we call in Lutheranism the bound will here. And it's a bound will revealed by preaching. Lewis has very cleverly given us preachers for each and every person, and a reminder that you may at any time be called to be a preacher to a particular person. But the preacher's plight in our Pilgrim's Tale is that they will not always see the residents make it to heaven. This is a harsh sort of reality about the evangelical and apologetic task, one that racks us pretty constantly. I had the opportunity to teach a week of apologetics at Camp Arcadia this summer. It was pretty amazing, but as I was talking to people, it's like Here We Still Stand. The camp experience is amazing. There's a lot of space to talk and to be free. And as you're talking to more and more people, you realize every single person has had an apologetic encounter that they feel guilty about. They feel guilty about because they have failed to be the messenger who got the person back. It's usually family, friends. It might be as painful as a brother or sister, or I think for many the most painful, a child who has left the faith, who has chosen hell over heaven seemingly, and no amount of preaching seems to bring them back, or no amount of right answers seems to bring them back. But that is not why we are sent. We are not sent to guarantee success. We're sent to go proclaim the word. And he will send us again and again and again. Lewis tells us that this visit to hell is somewhat of a vacation. Sometimes the ghosts go back to hell. Sometimes they make it a little further up and a little further in towards heaven. But if they go back, they'll likely be back on the cliffside again. Sent the messenger again and again. The preaching is not just a one-time occurrence. In fact, the journey from hell to heaven described in this tale is quite long and quite painful. It's painful because the desires of the ghosts are always to go back, to what is comfortable. That heavy grass hurts their feet, and the walk to the mountain is really, really far. It's like from San Diego to my house. You got to go 4 hours by car inland, so you can see how difficult this must be. You would turn back. You would want real water. You would want to go to your house if you had the opportunity. You would have the bus pick you up anywhere you were standing if you've been walking barefoot through the rocks long enough. And walking barefoot through the rocks is exactly what the human will bound to sin is. It is the nature that we are born to. We want to go back to what is comfortable. We want to pick our feet up. God's righteousness, God's holiness is something we are not comfortable with. It is something that is unfair. It is something that is undeserved. And so we want to reject it. We want to go back to home. We want to go sit on the couch. But we are not left alone. We are given preachers. Christ sends them into our life, in our churches, in our homes, through husband, through wife, through spouse, from father to child. And we carry with us the good news that Lewis transplants into The Great Divorce and to all his other works, that Christ has died for the forgiveness of your sins. I think one of the incredible things about The Great Divorce is how many times that word forgiveness of sin shows up. It's in chapter after chapter, And for something that's supposed to be, allegory, you think, well, does this represent the forgiveness of sins? No, Lewis stops representing when he starts talking about forgiveness. And he hands it over again and again, even when it seems like to us it fails to do what it promises. But that promise is never ceasing. He will send messengers over and over again, and he will send them to carry us to the mountain when our feet can no longer do it. A beautiful image painted later in the story. For Lewis, though, the story ends with sort of this harsh reality of the law. The story ends with our unnamed narrator waking up in his office. It was all an illusion. But the waking up is quite harsh. He has seen himself in every single person who opposed heaven, and every single person who continued to make the choice to go back to hell. He has made the case for divorcing heaven from hell, that these are incompatible, and they are incompatible precisely because of our desire. Our desire as sinners is not for heaven, but for hell. So then how do you get out? The end of the story is, I have to say, somewhat bleak here, because our unnamed character is left sort of harshly thrown onto the floor out of his dream with the hope, I think if you know Lewis's life, of friends coming in, messengers in real life, preaching to him, but the story sort of ends with realizing who he is, somebody bound for hell. But in our world, in the reality for us, we can fill in this gap. We can divorce heaven and hell finally. We can go back to Lewis's words that evil can be undone by divorcing law from gospel, from preaching this law that Lewis reveals, and then bringing that sweet balm of the forgiveness of sins, particularly in a way that ends this choice, that ends this will that will always want to get back on the bus to hell when heaven is too sweet, too real, too unfair, too untamed to handle. We are sent the blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ, to forgive us all of our sins, not as a theory, but as a silence, as an undoing of evil, finally, not to make evil good, but purely and only to bring it to an end, not just in the world, but particularly for you, for the forgiveness of your sins. And so when you read The Great Divorce and you find yourself a resident of hell, and you ask yourself, how do I divorce my evil? How do I divorce hell from heaven in my own life? You must go and find Christ. You must go and find the preaching of his word, the forgiveness of sins. You must go find a place that will take that choice away from you. The preaching of the word, the administration of his sacraments, your baptism, those places where a messenger drags you over and over again from hell to heaven. This is what we do here at Here We Still Stand. This is the mission of 1517, to declare and defend the good news that you are forgiven and free on a crown of Christ. This is the forgiveness that Lewis himself received and realized and wrote about in his works. And this is the forgiveness that is proclaimed to you each and every Sunday. I hope that every one of you can have an opportunity to go read The Great Divorce. I hope that you go find yourself in it, but I hope even more still that you are divorced from your free will, from your choice to be bound to heaven and to be given Christ alone for the salvation and forgiveness of your sins. Amen.